do you think people will look at a black player and say, if you're not fast or aggressive, I'm not going to take you? Do you think there are people that will look at a black player and go, you're probably a bit ghetto, I don't want you on my team? Or do you think there might be some people who look at Hispanic players and say, you're probably going to hold on to the ball a little bit too long, or I'm worried that you might spend too much time on the floor, like rolling around, diving, all of the kind of stereotypes. Do you think those things kind of are prevalent in selection?
My answer is yes, but I hope not. You know what I mean? I think there are people like that think that way. You know what I mean? Yes, it's unfortunate, but I struggle with like people who think that way. You know what I mean? Because it's just like I don't know. I mean, yes, I do think it's like, oh yeah, here's a black player and he's going to jump higher and he's going to run faster and he's going to do this, right? Like, and I think they automatically presume that, right? And then I even think they look at white people and be like, oh, you're going to be slow. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and stuff. So like, I just assume there's these natural stereotypes that happen instead of going, here's the lines of the field, play, and let me see what you do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I've seen black players outrun white players. I've seen white players outrun black players. I've seen very technical players do this, and I've seen non-technical players do this, and I've seen Hispanic players that go in harder than most people and they don't dive. And I think like I've seen it all. So like, why do we have to presume?
Why does bias exist? Actually,
Why do we presume something?
Yeah.
Or if there's like you said, ghetto, like if there's like, why do we assume somebody lives somewhere or acts a certain way when we don't know? No, we've never met this person and we've never had a conversation, and we're predetermining something instead of letting their actions speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Because I don't care if you live somewhere I don't, or I live where you don't, and you know what I mean? It's like how you conduct yourself.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. I think there has to be something said about first impressions. Because, you never get an opportunity to make another or a second first impression. Yeah. And I know that whenever I'm, going to showcases or that kind of thing, I'm worried about bias. I'm worried that somebody is going to see a player who is kicking it, having fun with their friends, and decide, okay, well, this person's not serious about what they're doing. Or, whatever the case may be. And so I will often speak to players and say, look, when we're traveling for this reason. We're going to showcase. We want to make sure we're putting our best foot forward all the time. So think about how you're talking. Think about the behavior. We don't want you to be in the airport working for a TikTok video, because you never know who's watching. You never know who's walking. That kind of thing. That's bias. Right. That's assuming that's because somebody TikToks and somebody, is dancing however they want in the TikTok, that we automatically assume them to be not serious, or somebody who culturally we don't necessarily want to have in our dressing room, or that kind of thing. What do you think we can do to kind of turn those impressions? Because I know that I've try to mitigate any kind of bias by trying to prevent those behaviors in my players. Now that's more than likely my bias. I'm thinking this is what this coach might be thinking.
Yeah.
And again, my bias is looking at a coach thinking they might have bias. And so whether they do or they don't, it's safer to do it this way. It's safer to go and just be this way. Whereas what a coach might want, a coach might be looking for somebody that's got some personality that they can inject into their team and that kind of thing. So how do we, I mean, it's a minefield. How do we navigate that?
Well,
go on, you go.
Yeah, it's like so hard because like every person. So if you're a college coach, you have this kind of vision of what you're looking for, right? And then now, so we have college coach A, and then we have college coach B, and they could be like, well, they're on polar opposites of what they're looking for, culture-wise, like team culture, right? This, that, So it's so hard for us who are taking this team to go and say, hey, don't do TikToks at the airport. You never know who's watching. But maybe coach A is like grumpy and they don't want to see kids doing TikToks in an airport. But coach B over here is like, dude, I love the way how they're bonding with their team,
Yeah.
And all of this stuff. And, so you can, how much do we really control it? Now, behavior, I think, is like, part of it is like, hey, don't be rude and do a TikTok and cause a line to back up. Don't be in people's way. But if you're off in a corner at an airport and you're TikToking, maybe a coach looks at that and says, God, they really love each other. Like that's a great environment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they care for their teammates.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's definitely valid. The question I have is, do we wait until that player is in the environment to kind of start to show that? Is that a part of the recruitment?
Yeah.
And then in terms of being rude, what's rude? You said, let's not create a line or something to kind of back up. But then for me, playing music loud,
yes, that's
rude. And
Agreed.
So if you're doing a TikTok and you've got the music playing and is that rude? Is that disturbing people around you? And how is that going to be viewed? These are that's kind of where my mind goes when I'm thinking about it. And I'm like, listen, I want you to be yourself because I think, and we've spoken about this a lot in terms of being player centered.
Yeah,
players should be able to kind of be themselves and just show who you are. We want to see your personality. And I'll always say, show me your personality on the field. I want to see who you are on the field. But when we're taking decisions about whether we're going to add someone into a pool of players, we do need to know what they are like in a group and that kind of thing. And so, I think it's an impossible kind of conversation to have because it's so much. There's so much guesswork involved.
Yeah.
You just never know. And so what you try to do is set some standards for behavior that you hope hit a middle ground where somebody can kind of see enough of what they want to see without too much. And then once they get that player into their environment, they can then turn the dial as to whether they want it to dial down or to dial up. I think that's probably the easiest way to navigate that.
I want to build on that. I heard a college coach and she was talking about, if you're on the bench, like I want to hear you be positive. I don't want to see you sulk, right? I want to see you talking with your teammates, cheering them on, etc. I want to see how you warm up. Like that is so, like she said, that was so important for me. I want to see how you warm up. Are you in it? Or are you out, like just checked out? Maybe you're starting, maybe don't know you're starting. Like she's like, I just want to see how you respond and how you are, because team culture and personality and being a good human being was the most important thing for her. She was like, I'll take a good soccer player and make them better. But if you're a bad human being, I'm not, you know what I mean? So going back to like what we talked about, like TikToking, just be polite, right? Don't cause problems. Like if you're going to go TikTok in an airport, make sure you're away from people, not causing lines, not disturbing, not blasting music. And so, we just traveled recently to Oceanside. Okay. And like recently we've been allowing the team, in the past we never did, to have music while they warm up.
Right.
And the girls, like, to their credit, like, they're focused, they're vibing, like, you know what I mean? Like, you can tell they're getting some pep in the step. And like sometimes the music's loud. And my first thought is like, oh my God, I don't want to be rude to people like near us. You know, there's a coach right over there. And then I'll go turn it down. And then the girl's like, Johnny, that's so low. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm like, is it low? And so I wear hearing aids, right? So like all of a sudden I'm like, I hear it just fine now. You know what I mean? They're like, it's so low. And I'm like, okay, I'll turn it up a little bit. I'm like, guys, just make sure that coach has to coach his game. And I don't want them fighting over the music to project his voice.
Of course.
And they're like, yeah, no problem. Like, you know, and so they make sure it's like a reasonable volume. It still seems loud to me, but again, I have amplifiers in my eardrums, you know what I mean? So, you know, I'm like, okay. And like, you know, I'll look at my other coach. And I'm like, is this good? He's like, yeah, it's fine. I'm like, okay. Cause you know, I can't really tell at that point, but that's a be courteous.
100%.
Be courteous. So, but yeah, don't be like, you know, are we preventing bias from other coaches, other people? How we act and being a good human, I think, on the outskirts of like when we travel is important, right?
Yeah.
But
I think it's important. I think it's important to say that a lot of the, you know, we're talking about how we can mitigate these things, and I think a lot of these actions that we take are always being done to try to put the player in the best situation possible. While also trying to make sure we're not kind of harming player development. We're not, you know, we're not missing out on allowing players to reach potential, you know, and kind of looking at things a lot more kind of long term in terms of short term. And I'm not just necessarily talking about this whole, you know, this area of bias where we've just been talking about, you know, noise or music or, you know, that kind of thing. Just the whole thing, looking at things like, you know, socioeconomic factors, race, whether it's gender, whether it's you know, physical maturity or you know, age, you know, that kind of relative age effect, whether it's training age, whether it's biological age. You know, I think we're always trying to do what we can to try to reduce the chances that these things can impact players in terms of how they are judged, how they are developed, and how they're seen outside of our environment, especially because we take the time to get to know the players. So we, you know, all of these things eventually, they just don't matter. They go into this pot, you know, that makes up the player, and all of the different attributes go into there. And what we see is this, you know, this blend of all of these different attributes that make the player. But what we want to try to do is make sure that they're seen in the best way, make sure that they're developed in the right way. And yeah, it's a tough job.
It is.
It's not easy. So look, I've got a question for you. What kind of things can we do then to kind of mitigate some of these biases? So, you know, when we're looking at players, do we judge on potential specifically, and do we have kind of, you know, maybe some kind of a standardized scoring that we use for a player? And so, you know, let's say I'm doing a tryout and I've got a few key areas listed. So I've got dribbling, and we've got, you know, rated between 1 and 4. We've got first touch, we've got passing ability, we've got spatial awareness, you know, a bunch of things that all have a scoring component to them. Is that going to be a good way of removing any kind of bias because we're scoring them, or can there still be bias in the scoring?
No, I don't think there could be bias in the scoring. So if we label if we label the scoring criteria as technical ability, passing, shooting, dribbling, right? 1v1 defending, 1v1 attacking. And I'm sure, how deep do we want to go with that? But just general, okay? Yeah. Then we can go decision making.
How do you quantify that?
Yeah,
how do you quantify decision making? That's a tough one.
Yeah. But you could say, all right, so if I were to quantify it, let's say 5 is if I'm going to give a person a score, 5 is the highest, right? It's okay, so I've seen this player make good decisions to keep the ball overall collectively, right? Just you don't have to be super specific. Yeah, they're trying to keep the ball. They're not just panic kicking this ball everywhere, right? Okay, cool. They are trying to play passes to feet. They're trying to play into space when necessary. They are taking risks at the right time, right? That's still good decisions. Just because we turn over the ball, right? Okay, so we have all of that. Then if we look at the soccer side of it, we can eliminate height, physicality, size, right? Yes, I mean people will score physicality. I laugh because I remember seeing Chavy's youth reports, and it was not physical, easy, pushed off the ball, very technical, this and that. So you can note it all right, we need to build physical strength out of you. But that's a part of going through puberty and growing up. You know what I mean? Maybe you're just a little one at this moment. That's okay. But we know we got to teach you how to use your body. Okay. Anyway, so you can quantify the ability to play football.
Okay. So let me play devil's advocate a little bit.
Sure.
Let's say you've got a team who are a good team. But then you get let's not say generational talent, but let's say you get a supremely talented player who has a national reputation, who comes into your team. They've been playing 2 years up for most of their youth, and now they're going into their age group. They all of a sudden, when you're scoring, you're saying, well, 1 will be the best dribbler here. That so we're scoring a 1 for top dribbling, and maybe let's say a 5, or however we want to score it.
Right.
And all of a sudden, 1 now is this top national reputation player who comes in, and nobody's even close to that level. So they're basically going to be the standalone player within that rubric, that score. Does that then impact how the rest are being judged and selected? Or are we basically just saying, to be a number 1 dribbler, you have to be able to do this and this effectively. To be a number 2 dribbler, you need to be able to do this and this and this. How do you think that works?
I mean, that's a great question. So if I want to hit the second part of that question. If you're going to be a number 1 dribbler, you have to do this, and this, right? And a number 2 is this, and this over here. Okay. 1, you have to know your range within the tryout, right? So we have this national team player, and then we got little Sally over here who can't walk and chew gum. Okay. Yeah. Well, Sally's a 5, right?
Sure.
And national team players a 1 at this. Right. But if we standardize it right now, I mean, we're not Barcelona, we're not Man City, we're not Arsenal. So it's hard to say number 1 has to be able to do all of this to be a number 1. Right? Because we don't even with our own clubs, I don't know what the previous coach was teaching them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But national team player over here is dicey. They got skills. They can use scissor step overs, V moves, L moves, Maradonas. And it's fluid, but I may never see that player use it because the situation that they've come across during the tryout never forced her to do it or him to do it, right? But I can see them take a nice little bell touch, little croqueta, just around one player, easy, gone, see ya. That player I could probably tell is comfortable doing Maradonas or, inside cuts or outside cuts, but the situation never arose for them to use it, right? So if we give them that hard rubric to be a 1 and they have to do all this, we may not see it during the trial.
You're right.
Okay. So, there are 2 now. They're probably a 1. But setting the standard, figuring out who in the moments. Okay, so this is my pool of 30 players that I'm looking at during tryouts. As a coach, when I view tryouts or trials, right? I sit back and I watch the general masses, and I try to find the elite players first because they're setting the standard, right? What is the standard for this age group right now?
Right.
Okay. So, now I've identified 3, right? That's okay. They're good at dribbling. They're good at receiving. They turn on the on the back foot, like whatever the case may be. Yep. I've seen it over multiple times. Good. They're the top of the group.
Right.
Now I'm basing everything to that.
That was the question I was asking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because do we for me, that's the most sensible way to do it. What's the top level of your group? Because, there are some times where there's an age group within the club that's not as strong as the other age groups. And so if you have a club wide rubric, you may well end up with players who aren't scoring 1s. And so, there then becomes bias in, well, look, we need 1s. And so we're not going to take these players because they're not 1s. Or we may overlook certain areas, for the sake of these other areas, And so I think judging the age group based on the strongest players, weakest players, and then I think that's the best way to go about doing it. Yeah, I would agree with that.
If we had a full if we were a full academy, right? Like Arsenal, and we'll say the Arsenal women's team because they're UCL champions. That breaks my heart, right? That breaks my heart a little bit. But so Arsenal's women's team, they know the standard of their club. They know what each coach is coaching and teaching at every age level, right? So they have the ability to go, okay, we need 1s, right? I'm going to go watch this local game. I'm going to go watch this team. I'm going to go watch this team. I've identified a 1 that we need to fill in. Little Janie, we would like you to join the Arsenal Women's Academy. You're a 1. Okay. You know what I mean? But at club levels, like just basic club levels, especially here in America, we don't have that ability. It'd be nice. We talked about this a little bit, of standardizing what we're teaching, right?
Yeah.
At every age, once we're in that pathway, then we have the ability to go recruit and say, yep, we need a 1 because, we're Arsenal and we're UCL champions. We want you to come into our academy, right? Okay. Right. Then that's a lot different than what we deal with every year, every day.
Sure. Yeah. So scoring, standardized scoring, how does scoring, factor in is I think one way that we can look to kind of mitigate bias. Do you think, so we've just had the tryouts. We probably had 4 or 5 people at a time who were looking at players. Which kind of allows us to kind of get a spread of data. And you hope that mitigates bias. Is that better? Is that a better way of doing it than having one person who is judging everybody from the same perspective?
I like multiple people.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
and I had to. Sorry, I knew which way I was going. I was trying to get it. I was trying to get it out of my mouth. No, I like multiple people judging because, and especially if it's a coach like you and I were at the same tryouts, right? We were watching the same age, and especially day one, right? Because we were kind of just trying to identify. I know you view footballers the same as I do. Right. But at the same time, you see different things than I do. And you're like, no, Johnny, you need to look at this girl. Watch what she does. This was a magical moment. I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, I missed that. But I trust you as a coach that you have high standards and you're looking for this and you're looking, and it makes sense. So you see it, or I can turn around and say, Angelo, man, this player, like, she's got something in her. There's a spark in her, and she had this one magical moment. Take a look at her, and you're gonna be like, all right. And then you take a look at her, Yeah. So having multiple eyes, same beliefs, same views and standards as to what a player is, a proper baller is, I think is important, right?
So to counter that, then, let's say we have a couple people who are assessing a group, and one of them's going, man, this one's a baller. Look at what they're doing. Look at their ability to kind of take their first touch away from pressure, and then even when the pressure comes, look how they use their feet to get themselves out of it. Look how they use their they're smaller, so they use their low center of gravity to kind of cut across people and cut people off, and that kind of thing. Very clever with how they use their body. Not necessarily big and strong, but they're very clever with how they use their body. They draw fouls, this kind of stuff. And then the other person's going, nah, I don't like that. Not quick enough, not strong enough, that kind of thing. So back to my last question, is it better to have one person who's judging the whole group compared to multiple people who see things differently? And so therefore that can lead to some kind of consternation or some kind of arguing within, whether we select, whether we don't select. And again, I agree with you. I think having more people who see the things from more perspectives gives you a rounder idea of the player. Because some people will look at things more physically, from a more physical point of view, and they'll say things like not quick enough, doesn't jump high enough, doesn't hold the ball up well enough, doesn't have the physical body strength, this kind of stuff. But then player number two is maybe more tactical and is talking about the space and understands how to attack the weak side, and is constantly kind of looking and is aware of the surroundings so that they know when to speed the game up, when to slow it down, compared to player three or coach three, who is saying, I love that first touch on the ball. I love that they're trying the kind of scooped passes, and they're trying the back heels, and a little bit more kind of creativity in their technique, and that kind of thing. I think that gives you a much rounder view of the player. But when you're trying to select for a group, is it better to have it from one person's perspective, where they're looking at every single player from the same perspective, and is then able to judge the difference between those players from that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, kind of rooting back to it, I think, in the youth world, like the head coach of whatever team has to make the final say. It's their vision, right, of what they want in their team and stuff like that. But I think, like, during a tryout, like, if I see a player and I'm like, and you're the head coach, right, of the top team, I'm like, hey, Angelo, like, this player, man, she's good. She's doing this, and this. And then maybe you're on that other spectrum. Well, yeah, and she's not fast enough, not quick enough.